Good evening, everyone, and welcome to 6 Degrees of Penn State, a moderated discussion featuring two of Penn State alumni who utilize the power of the Penn State network and found success with their respective industries. Hello, my name is Bob Morgan, and I will be serving as this evening's moderator. Just a little bit of background on myself. Penn State alumni, graduated in 1989, entrepreneur, had been blessed to grow and build a company over the course of 15 years. And after having a successful exit, now I'm in a position to create a new company and a public charity called Pivotal Moments. And I'm now in the business of storytelling, which is really cool because now tonight I get to bring to you the stories of two young gentlemen who have built phenomenal businesses and are paving the way and showing what the true power of the Penn State network is and how that can help you build your business, in your career as an entrepreneur. But before we get started, I'd like to share some information on Penn State Startup Week, which is powered by PNC. Thank you to PNC for all your fantastic support of Invent Penn State and Startup Week. Startup Week is an integral, broader part of Penn State's Invent Penn State initiative. It's a university-wide event that connects students with innovative alumni pioneers who are achieving success in a variety of industries and disciplines. Throughout the week, students get to discover, explore, experience, and celebrate entrepreneurship. We have over 75 virtual events from March 22nd through the 26th. And as one of the gentlemen who's been around since the beginning of Startup Week, this is absolutely fantastic to be able to sit here tonight and talk about 75 virtual events. Hopefully next year we'll have some live events as well. But these events are hosted by faculty, student, and staff in the academic colleges and the Commonwealth campuses across the university, and that's truly something for everyone. For more information on Startup Week, including a full schedule of events, please visit startupweek.psu.edu. Participants can engage with and follow Startup Week on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at PSU Startup Week and hashtag Penn State Startup. You'll notice that the real-time captioning, closed captioning is enabled for this webinar. If you want to show or hide this feature, click on the CC button in your toolbar and then click on Show Subtitles and Hide Subtitles to toggle between the options. And now for the exciting part, I get the opportunity and the pleasure to introduce you to our two guests for this evening. First off, JT Marino, who's the co-founder of Tuft and Needle, and also the Chief Disruption Officer. Back when I started my company, we had no such thing as Chief Disruption Officer, so I'm looking forward to hearing what that means from JT. So he's a Chief Disruption Officer at Serta, Simmons Betting. He's a passionate storyteller, facilitator, teacher. He's inspiring Tuft and Needle's most challenging and disruptive projects. JT has been instrumental in redefining the sleep industry and retail experience through the business's rapid nationwide expansion, award-winning company culture, evolving product offering, and acclaimed advertising campaigns. JT, welcome to the show. And speaking as an entrepreneur, sleep is one of those things that you really suffer when you're building a business. So I wish I'd have known you sooner. I'd had an opportunity to experience some of your products to help me sleep throughout my journey. So look forward to hearing from you and hearing some of your insights. Next up, Hunter Swisher. Hunter currently serves as the founder and chief executive officer of Phospholutions, Inc., which he founded prior to graduating with an undergrad degree from Penn State. Phospholutions develops solutions for managing global phosphorus use. I'm not going to butcher this, but rhizosorb technology is a soil amendment and fertilizer additive, increasing nutrient and water use efficiency, cutting fertilizer costs and reducing the environmental impact of phosphorus fertilizer. So I grew up on a dairy farm when I was a kid before I went to Penn State, which is where I kind of learned my entrepreneurial journey. So I have a fondness for working with the farms and fertilizer. So I'm fascinated by what you're doing, Hunter. So I look forward to hearing more about your journey and sharing some of your insights. So for the audience, if you have any questions for either JT or Hunter, please submit them through the Q&A feature found on your Zoom toolbar. Please note that due to time constraints, it may not be able to answer all the questions we received tonight. So with that, let's get started. So as now that I've changed careers after building a consulting company and a national security business, and I'm now in the business of sharing uplifting, inspiring stories through film, TV, podcasts, and things like that. One of the things I always like to talk to entrepreneurs about is what is that light bulb moment? And we all have them. There's that moment in time when something clicks. So tell us, we'll start with JT. What was that light bulb moment for you when you thought, you know what, I have this idea and it's worth betting everything on. I'm going to give up my career. I'm going to give up the path that I'm on. I'm going to take the risk. I'm become an entrepreneur and I'm going to run with this. So let's hear your light bulb moment.
So for Tuft and Needle, I would say it actually started with the test. So just before our test, briefly after Penn State, I went to work for a software consultancy and then ended up in Silicon Valley helping several different companies build the tech side, the product side. And my co-founder, Dehi, who is also Penn State alum, I met him through Liz Kissenweather through the entrepreneurship program, was my co-founder. So he and I were working at a startup in downtown Palo Alto and decided that we wanted to just take a stab at doing something of our own because we've worked at other startups for a while and wanted to, we've learned enough and felt it was time. So what we did was we spent a few weeks retrospecting on our lives, thinking of problems. So rather than trying to come up with an idea, we rather wanted to start with just listing out various problems. And without telling the whole story, we had a few different concepts and we built little tests around them. And for Tuft and Needle, we put together a hate list, everything we hated about shopping for mattresses and everything we hated about mattresses and what we would just do instead. And then from that list, we reduced it to what we felt was like the least we would have to do to start a business. And we built out a fake website with it was actually a photo stock image of a mattress. And we launched that website and took out a Google ad. This is in 2012. And when we launched this test, within about 15 minutes, somebody attempted to buy, and the credit card form was hooked up, but it wouldn't actually capture funds. So I would say, to answer your question, we didn't really have, it wasn't like, stroke of genius or the light bulb. We sort of engineered and took a more methodical approach to finding something that would catch. And we built a test around that.
Cool. How about you, Hunter? What was that kind of inspirational journey? It could be a journey, it could be a moment, it could be a light bulb. How about you?
Yeah, so Bob, mine was very much a journey. Mine started actually during my undergraduate career at Penn State. I was in the plant science department at the College of Ag and very much interested in going to get a PhD. To be quite honest, really didn't ever envision myself in the business world in any facet. My light bulb moment was spread out over I would say about a 6 to 9 month period of being in a classroom, learning about a technology that a professor of mine had developed, learning about that technology as it relates to the current way of doing things and how things aren't that efficient, primarily focused on agriculture, and how there was a pretty big threat that was threatening humanity that if we didn't get out in front of, it would become the next issue. Oil was a big thing, then carbon's becoming a big thing, and now phosphorus is what we feel is going to be the future. And so I had this aha moment over the course of about 6 to 9 months as I had started to think about this idea as being more of how do we bring this type of technology to market. Explored a few opportunities with some resources at Penn State. I was very fortunate to ride the Eric Barron train here as he launched Invent Penn State, kind of on the forefront. My sophomore year was when he came in, and that's when this initiative started popping up. And I think the light bulb moment for me, arguably one of the most monumental moments of my life, was getting handed $10,000 from the Summer Founders Program. And I have no doubt we'll spend some time talking about that here today. That was the moment where someone hands you $10,000 in cash at the age of 19, 20 years old and says, stay in state college and focus on your business. That made it sure worthwhile for me to hone in and kind of divert away from my PhD track to do so.
I don't think any entrepreneur can be successful without a lot of different factors, to include, help from others, people who trust you, believe in you. Somebody trusted and believed in you, gave you $10,000. So we're all sitting here, Penn State Startup Week. Invent Penn State has been one of those programs that has just been life-changing for a number of folks at Penn State to help them launch their business. So let's talk about your Penn State affiliation and how that has helped you through this entrepreneurial. You're both in different phases, right? Companies, your companies are a little bit older, more mature, but let's talk about the Penn State affiliation, and not just inside Penn State walls, but the alums, because I myself, when I started my company, we talked about 6 degrees of separation. I actually went 1 degree of separation and recruited my brother to end his career at PricewaterhouseCoopers on his path to be a partner, and sucked him into Morgan Franklin and said, let's go build a business. And, and then, we ended up recruiting from Penn State and all these other things. So, it's not just what Penn State, the university, does, but also the alums. So why don't both of you share a little bit about what the organization at Penn State has done for you, but also the alums outside the organization who you've been able to tap into. Some of the work that I do, I tell those are your guardian angels, those people that are looking out for you and help you. So Hunter, since you brought the subject up, why don't you roll with that?
Sure. So Bob, I will start off by admitting that I think my claim to fame here at Penn State has been by far being the biggest abuser of all resources that have ever spawned for entrepreneurship. And I'm very proud of that. So my journey, again, began in as my sophomore year in college. And as a sophomore in college, you have no idea what you want to do. You have a field of study that you think you might want to study, and you don't really know what to do next. And so for myself personally, had the light bulb moments in a classroom that said, this is something pretty grand, and I don't know why nobody's done anything with this before. And so I actually approached my advisor. My advisor had referenced me to somebody within the College of Ag, Mark Gagnon, who spearheads the E&I program nowadays. At that time, very focused on agricultural entrepreneurship. And him and I spent a whole lot of time sitting on a whiteboard, drawing all sorts of big, dollar signs and figuring out how we were going to, build this big business. And at that time, I applied for the Ag Springboard competition. It was specific to the College of Ag business pitch competition. And at the time, actually, I did not win that competition. I was a finalist, but did not win. My actual co-founder of Phospholutions won that with another business venture with another partner. And him and I had connected afterwards and figured out how we were going to continue to pursue this idea together. That's when I applied for the Summer Founders. Summer Founders was 10 grand to sit yourself in State College as a student and don't do any classes, don't get a job, and certainly don't have an internship, just focusing on building your business. And I was fortunate enough to go through the Accelerator program at the Launchbox at the same time. That's Startup 101. How do you go and talk to customers about your idea and have them help you build it? Went through that process, and then I would say my alumni story here to chime in on that, Bob, is that we have a really phenomenal turf grass program at Penn State. And so my thesis was that turf grass would be a great market to launch our product to. And so I was able to reach out to about 15 Penn State alumni in the turf grass program across the country. Bought this little Subaru and drove it down into the ground all across the country, handing out samples and checking in on research plots, essentially trying to validate a proof of concept here for my idea. In that process, got some great feedback, great results, and ultimately some early adopters as customers. Went through the Ben Franklin Technology Partner, the Tech Accelerator. It was another accelerator program, a little bit higher level, focused on, boiling down into some pro formas, thinking about, building a 5-year projection on finances here, thinking about market research, thinking about how do you start to form a team. Came out of that, essentially Ben Franklin helped me essentially license the patents from the university. Went out, attracted some local angel investors, took in some investment, hired a few employees, and then I graduated in 2016. And that journey did not end there, leveraging the network. It really quickly, we dove very deeply into Ben Franklin's network, leveraged the SBDC, tapped into Penn Tap. I mean, the law clinic at the launch box, we eventually got kicked out of the launch box because we were using, I think it was 220 of the 260 hours that were done that semester were done on my company. Trademarks, patents, operating agreements, restricted unit agreements for employees, you name it, we leveraged all of them. Kind of branched out, raised a seed round that included our friends over at 1855 Capital, which is a venture capital fund that was formed here at Penn State, led by Matt Rhodes. Penn State, the state of Pennsylvania, and the Alumni Association are all investors in that fund. We took in some seed money there, attracted some strategics, and the alumni network still continues to reap benefits now. We actually just recently brought on our COO, who's a former alumni here at Penn State, went off into the world as a sustainability executive, worked at some big multi-billion-dollar corporations, and fortunately for us, just joined us here at March 1st, actually, to spearhead this company and his leadership and sustainability. So it's just it's a network, and it's a group that just keeps on giving.
Oh, thank you. And you know what? That's the lesson that the future entrepreneurs need to learn from this, is that there are people willing to help you. And when it comes to the Penn State network, they're even more willing to help you. All you have to do is ask, and you're going to find somebody that's going to help you and support you. And, we talk about 6 degrees of separation. I swear I travel around the globe. It's probably 1 or 2 degrees separation. I mean, my son landed in Iceland a couple of months, before the pandemic, and he ran into Penn Staters, right? So we're everywhere. And all you have to do is kind of have that conversation and let them know what you're doing. You guys are trying to change the world and make a big impact. And there's a lot of really passionate alums that are willing to get behind you. JT, how about you? I mean, I'm not sure you were quite there when Invent Penn State was getting rolling, but kind of share your story with Penn State, the resources, alums. Did it have an impact? If it did, how was that impact? So take it away.
Sure. It was an impact, and it was important for me. The impact for me personally and our company was more on the soft side. So not so much tangible programs. I didn't know if there were any programs, honestly. We started Tuft and Needle after we left Penn State. But for me personally, I mean, every time I speak to Penn State, I always mention Liz Kissenweather, because she is who introduced me to my co-founder, which is for a lot of people, that's, one of the hardest things you do in the beginning is finding a good co-founder. He's also, one of my best friends. What in school, I was working on a little product. I was building a product, and a professor saw that and then referred me to Liz. And then I found out about the eShip Minor and entrepreneurship like curriculum, which turned into a little bit of a curriculum around the product I was building. And now looking back, it was clear that one of the things that was helpful for me is that, specifically with Liz, but also other professors who were a part of this, was that I felt it helped boost my confidence, because I could feel and see that there was confidence in my ability, that I would figure it out. At the same time as getting raw and objective feedback about what I was doing. So, which was really helpful for me in just even like my psyche in leading up into starting my own business. After leaving, it was more so like in the network of people. So like Matt Brzezina, David Racinko, and Chris Fanini, those people helped me also meet many other entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, early Y Combinator companies and all of that, when it was time. So what I've learned, with Tuft and Needle and growing a startup from something small to really, really big, is that there is no one person who's like the ultimate mentor. That it's like, it's the cumulative brain power of like your friends and family and colleagues, peers. And so the people who have gone through Penn State and some of the professors at one point or another, a lot of them were advisors to me. in pivotal moments and I didn't know what to do. All the decisions that you have to make, which is you end up making tons and tons of decisions. Being able to pick up the phone or send an email and ask somebody who's been there and done that for advice, or having them help connect you to somebody who might, was really important. It helps you get out of the bubble and off your island, because I feel like that's something that I'm an introvert, so that's something that I tend to gravitate towards, is holding up in my apartment while I was working on my startup, and having to reach out and meet new people was something I needed a lot of help with. So I would say really it was the people and broadening my network, and then just the confidence and seeing people who've been there before me.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And one of the things that I talk about with Invent Penn State, is encouraging entrepreneurs to build out that advisory group. And I know as entrepreneurs, we always tend to like to celebrate the fact that, like, we make a lot of mistakes and we learn from it and all those kind of things. But I always like to tell entrepreneurs that I'm talking to, I'm like, it's great to learn from your own mistakes, but it's really much more healthy and cheaper and less expensive if you can learn from other people's mistakes. So don't be afraid to build yourself an advisory group. Those people have been where you want to go. You can ask them questions. You can learn from their mistakes, and that's probably one of the more important things I learned as we were growing our company, is surround yourself with a team of people, particularly if you're a founder and a CEO. It's lonely at the top, and to have that person that you can reach out to outside your organization, bounce off ideas with you, it makes the world of difference as you're building your company. It's funny, JT, you mentioned pivotal moments. So I actually have a charity called Pivotal Moments, because I've always been fascinated by those moments in your life that make a huge impact. And the charity right now is about sharing stories and education around mental strength and mental fitness, because we all need uplifting, particularly in today's environment. But I'm going to ask you a question that kind of each of you kind of relates to that. But just to give you an idea, like, I look back on my journey, and there was a point where I almost dropped out of Penn State. I was going into my third year for electrical engineering. I was battling with some health issues. I had a business that I could take over from my grandfather, which was a dairy farm. It was all mine for the taking. And it was a 30-second pivotal moment where he put his arm around me. He says, "Look, no pressure to take over the farm." He goes, "That was my dream. You need to chase your own dream." And just that instant gave me the freedom to go, okay, I'm going to go back. I'm going to continue to go to Penn State. I'm going to go on my own journey. So sometimes those pivotal moments are just very brief and fleeting, but they make a huge impact. So with that, the next question I have for both of you is, what was one of those difficult decisions that you had to make that was the most impactful? Right? As entrepreneurs, you wake up every day and you make decisions, sometimes life and death for your business. So do you have one that just sticks out of your mind that is really impactful, that was difficult to make? And where did you get the strength? Where did you get the wisdom? Was there somebody that you relied on to help you make that decision? How about you, Hunter? We'll let you go first.
Sure. So I would say that my big decision was not pursuing my PhD. So I was very technical by training, working in a lab on an independent research project, completely separate from my business, and was very passionate about that project. Got a lot of funding for that project. Had made a lot of headway in terms of data collection and just simply pursuing ultimately what would be a thesis here for my PhD. Had a professor willing to host me, etc. And it was extremely difficult for me because I always found myself to be more interested and immersed in the sciences and not as much in, say, the business. And I knew it was going to be a new challenge for me, as it was not something that I was technically trained in. I did not have any business exposure or anyone really in my family in business. I did not obviously take any classes. So for me to pursue that business venture was quite a risky thing. And it took me off of a track that I think ultimately I had to make the decision, am I willing to take a potential risk that could stunt my career, set me back a couple years. And I think what helped me get over the edge on that, and I've said this now for the third time, is this Summer Founders Program. So I really hope, just to echo JT, I hope Matt Brzezina's calling in here today, because Matt, I know, was a pretty key player in pulling the Summer Founders Program together. And in all honesty, $10,000 is a great reason to not pursue your PhD. And look, I mean, it was one of those things for me where I had to take that risk, and I really walked through the exercise in my head about, is this a good idea? And I think the echo chamber that I was sitting in with all the other folks in this ecosystem that Invent Penn State has cultivated, it was the echo chamber I needed to be in. When you get so many pats on the back and you get so many physical checks being handed to you and so many different people telling you to keep pursuing it and that it's a great idea, including your customers, it's certainly a compelling argument. And so, it wasn't an easy choice, and I still at some point would like to go back and get my PhD. But that was a pretty monumental moment in my life, and something that I do not regret in any regard, as I'm now sitting here, obviously founding and leading a company that's doing some really great things.
Yeah, well, that's a great story. And the reality is there's no wrong choice, right? It's just, and, I'm sure if you'd have pursued your PhD, you'd have been doing other incredible things. How about you, JT? What was that one impactful decision just pops into your mind?
This is a hard one to answer, because there's, I think, a few of these that through our journey after starting the business and right before it, but the one and most relevant, I think, early on, that was really difficult to decide on and had been haunting us both in good and bad ways through the course of our company, was deciding to bootstrap. So something that's unique about Tuft and Needle is that we had taken no outside funding. So we started with $6,000, and that was just to open up our business account. I put in $3,000, Dahi put in $3,000 to a bank account, and that was what we needed so that we could start spending on some early Google ads and all of that. And this is in a world where, in an echo chamber of Silicon Valley, where everybody raises, and the measuring stick is how much you've raised. Just try getting a press hit and you tell them that you didn't raise any money. That's literally what seems to validate you in the, typically. And so we decided to go this alternate path, and not necessarily, we had some ideas on what the pros and cons were. Obviously, one of the cons is you don't have a lot of money to spend on anything. So our first year, actually, contrary to what people probably think, was really, really slow. We just didn't have enough money to spend. So I couldn't work 60 hours a week or 70 hours a week. I couldn't, because there wasn't enough to do. There wasn't enough customers. But eventually we did start growing more, and then it ended up scaling quite a bit. But there's so much we couldn't do. Later on, so Tuft and Needle, we architected this new business model that became a massive wave in the mattress industry. And later you hear all these other competitors like Casper and Purple, which are really only the two big ones that kind of stuck around. But when we see these other companies flush with cash who've raised over $500 million to kill us and to take on the industry doing things, we just couldn't play that game. So we were very constrained. So I would say, that was always a challenge. You're essentially funding the growth while being cash poor. And then on the flip side, you go to a bank for a loan and you have no assets, and you're too young of a company so we're kind of stuck between, refusing venture capital and then later private equity, and then also not being able to secure money from a bank. But I would say one of the benefits was we got to control our own destiny. We didn't have to sacrifice everything just for the sake of growth. We could take our time if we wanted to take our time. We could push faster if we wanted to. So there were a lot of, pros and cons, from one end, most startups raise a lot of money. We're at the other end of the extreme. So it also comes with its own benefits and also risks. But I would say that's one that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, well, you actually answered a question that I was going to ask later on. And because I think both of you went on different journeys, right? As far as taking outside capital. My experience, we bootstrapped our business as well. And then there was a point where I spent about a year talking to private equity. And it was just an arduous, 12 months just getting beat up, trying to figure out whether we wanted to give up control. And even when you say minority investment, you're giving up control, right? Your path towards your own destiny becomes severely impacted. And so I think as entrepreneurs at Penn State, that's one of the things they really need to start looking at probably sooner than later, right? Which is, how do I feel about giving up control? How do I feel about taking on venture capital, private equity at some point in time? So your experiences are very valuable. And again, there's no right or wrong answer, right? It's a choice, but there's pros and cons that need to be weighed. Hunter, how about you? You I think you took a different path. So what's your pros and cons and philosophies on that, looking back now?
Yeah, so Bob, I did take a different path. Instead of bootstrapping, we have very much taken the venture capital route. Pros and cons, pros and cons. I think for myself personally, I truly think that the initiative that we're going after is a global based solution. I think it's a very capital intensive solution in the sense that we're tackling a market that takes 5+ years of $0 in revenue to build a product that can even enter the market. Ag tech is similar to, say, the medical space or pharmaceutical industry, and you'll pump $250 million into a $1 billion plus product line, and my dad can say hello in this process. And I think that for me, I really have always envisioned Phospholutions as being to that scale. So I think it's something that's bigger than me. And in that process, I do understand where I'm at in my career. I do understand where I'm at in this business. And I think that I'm here to really catapult this thing into a massive scale. And I think venture capital is the route to do that. And Bob, if I'm jumping ahead to a question here, I think you're maybe alluding to the fact of challenging. What's more challenging, start a company or grow one? Is that where you were sticking to here? Am I jumping ahead on the questions?
Maybe jumping ahead a little bit, but I wasn't necessarily following the script that I was given. I like to mix it up a little bit.
Good. So I think that my venture capital response directly ties into that. I think in terms of starting a new company, right? You really just need an idea and the kahunas to act on it, to go out there and start something. I think to grow it, it really takes a very sound strategy and execution. I do think it requires success. You're not going to grow something unless you're getting those proof points along the way. And it takes a hell of a lot of resources to do it. For myself personally, I feel like this is a pretty pressing problem and I wanted to go after this quickly. And I think venture capital has been a vehicle to do so. And I think it's been proving out for us. It's not always the way to go about this. And I'm actually 100% an advocate on building a business by bootstrapping. We have been extremely capital efficient and been trying to blend the two models to the best we can. Inevitably here to go as big as we want, it's required pretty significant capital infusion. Cool. And you're right, Bob, you do lose control. And I always make the joke that would you rather have 1% of Facebook or 100% of Phospholutions? And I would pick Facebook every single time. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I've got 3 boys. Shout out to Penn State. They all went to Penn State. One's still there. So, and as I was building the company, I'd come home and it's like, my one youngest son's like, Dad, it's so cool that you run this company. You have all this control. And I'm like, truthfully, son, like if you, and we were privately held. I said, if you're running a good company and you value your employees, you're working for them. right? You're doing some, and we had clients too, right? We had national security clients. So while you think you're running your company and you have all this control, the reality is your clients have control, your employees have control. You're there as this, kind of the spiritual leader, the strategic leader to get everybody to where they need to go. So control is one of those things, but again, financial control and all those other things that you have to make those decisions with, investors is a whole different ballgame. But anyway, so you talked about growing a company versus starting a company. JT, you built your company, you had an acquisition, and now you're part of a larger organization. So you're a few years ahead of Hunter in that arc of that journey. So why don't you talk about, some of the challenge you had, actually now that you're growing a company underneath somebody else's umbrella and what that all means.
Little modification there, was a merger, not an acquisition.
Oh, I'm sorry. Apologies.
Right.
Merger.
It was actually, and it was very explicit in the deal. We wouldn't have done it. What happened was, so Tuft and Needle, we got to a point where it was beginning to become very difficult to answer that question, because I didn't actually talk about this specifically, growing or starting. I think they're both independently very hard. And I think also it depends a lot. I mean, every company is different and every product is different. And I would also say there are people that are just better suited to start, where I think I've seen a lot of people leave this company who are like great for growing it, that's really, really struggled to start their business and have kind of just realized that's not them. Mm-hmm. And I've also seen the opposite. I've seen people sort of phase themselves out as the company's grown because it was very difficult. So growing Tuft and Needle was challenging, but it was not that difficult for the first 5 years, because we were riding a wave. There were a lot of variables in our favor. We had the right people at the right time. The market was ready for it. It was great. And then at about 5 to 6 years, even despite competition popping up and copycats, it was not hard. Really was not that hard. But when we began to tap out what was available on the online market, and we had to figure out how to keep growing and distribute into brick and mortar, because we sell a mattress, so it's a physical product. That became very difficult. The reason we did the merger was we actually didn't intend to. We were actually going to raise capital for our first time. So we bootstrapped to $250 million in annual revenue, but we still were cash poor, so cash poor that we weren't able to accelerate our retail expansion. We figured out how to go into a city, take it over with billboards, radio, television, profitably, accretively, in an over-index in contrast to our national growth index, and then drop in a store, and because that is capital intensive and has about a 6 to 1 year payback period, we can only really do 1 or 2 at a time. So if we really wanted to expand in a meaningful way to our numbers, where at the size we had to raise money. So we were out to raise 25 million. And then we came across a company, Advent, who private equity owned Serta Simmons, the largest mattress company, and said, if we were to put these companies together, you could essentially accelerate. Our goal was to catalyze the disruption in the mattress industry and make a customer first. That's it. It's like kind of a boring like mission statement, but it's something that was a serious problem and is still. And you see this big company that wants to be like Tuft and Needle, and Tuft and Needle wants to be that size. So they had this skeleton key to unlock all those retail stores that we were struggling to get in because we're this new brand. And they want to figure out how to build a loyal following for their brands, because they just make a mattress and sell it to stores. So that's why we did that. And I would say, honestly, that has been a very serious challenge for our team. So I would say this is probably the most serious, because this is just a little bit off, maybe a little bit off topic for entrepreneurship, but Tuft and Needle is growing. It's growing a lot. And Serta, Simmons, Beauty Rest, those brands are shrinking because they sell in stores, and stores are being phased out, especially with COVID accelerating people to buying online. So in a sense, we're trying to change this large company and fix them when their primary channels are fading into the darkness. So in a sense, that is a form of growth, is trying to grow within a broken model. That has been very, very hard. At a bigger company, everything just moves so slow.
Well, you bring up a good point, which actually dovetails into a question I was going to ask is, it doesn't really matter where you're at in your life cycle of your business. Pivoting is necessary, right? And, some companies don't pivot and they die. Other companies pivot too slowly and they lose tremendous amount of market share. I have the opportunity now to invest in companies and startups and venture capital backed companies. And one of the things people always ask me is like, what is one of the criteria? I'm like, I usually assess the leadership team and they're willing to pivot, right? Because if you think you can plan things out in the market, in finance, global economies and things like that, I wish I had your crystal ball, because, life would be a lot simpler. So, when we started our company, we were anticipating being in a national security business, and we had a business plan that was all around that. Next thing you know, we ended up with a contract with a $6 billion joint venture between British Telecom and AT&T. Our whole business model was not worth the paper it had just been printed on. So from that standpoint, my next question really is, how has your business, different than what you first started? How you envisioned it? Is there any significant changes? There may not be. It sounds like, JT, you merged with somebody and you're in the middle of a company needing to pivot. Hunter, you're fully, head steam, full of steam into your vision and things like that. But was there anything kind of sticks out to you that says, this is not what we envisioned, but we pivoted? Because I do believe entrepreneurs need to feel comfortable pivoting if they feel it's the necessary decision, and holding on to that business plan or that idea to the detriment of the future growth of the business can be devastating sometimes. So what do you think about that, Hunter?
Yeah, so our mission has remained the same, which is a good thing, in my opinion. I think our overall thesis long term has stayed the same. What has really changed has been the reality checks that happen along the way that either force you to pivot, force you to fail fast, or force you to beef up your strategy. So I think for us, we have certainly pivoted in our strategy, I think, for accomplishing our mission. I think that we have certainly refined the vision to be a little bit more simplified and straightforward. At the same time, it certainly hasn't decreased in the dream here. The dream is still very, very large. I think that now that we have attracted the venture world, now that we've started to see some successes, there's bigger stakes, there's more resources, there are more people on board on this thing. And that starts to look like a lot of different problems that you faced as you started out. So I think that the one thing that's changed the most for us is that we're dealing with new problems that are more around growth than it is around figuring out what the hell you want to be when you grow up. And so it's a great place to be.
Fantastic. How about you, JT?
Well, and I think it really depends on the companies, but for Tuft and Needle, the first few years was primarily, I would say, product driven. We really relied on the product, the customer experience, everything from discovering the brand, person buying it, getting shipped, unpackaging, using the product, and then how it performs over the next few years as you're using it. It was really iterating and focusing on that. And we got to a point where we continue to iterate and develop new products, but it's less of a focus on that. And it's more a focus on brand awareness and marketing, because there's not really a lot more to continue to perfect. There's still room for innovation. And we are working on it. It just gets harder at scale, and it gets harder the better you do, and then it gets harder for the sort of nth degree. What I mean is we had a 15% return rate at one point, and we finally got it down to 4%, and going from 4 to 3 is extremely difficult. So it really became more of a marketing and differentiation and expansion problem in our as we got larger as a company. And I would also say internally, how it's different than I thought. Back to how a company kind of goes through phases, and you've got like that early phase and like an in-between kind of a larger phase. People sort of change like through that. A lot of people it's not as the company's not as relevant to them. So that early culture is sort of at this point almost gone. We still have a lot of foundational pieces and values and activities that we used to do that are still around, but it's just a totally different vibe. The company, when it was under 40 people, is very different than when we were 200 people. And then also, it used to be a team of people like jacks of all trades. People could wear different hats. Everybody knew everything going on. And now we're a company where I actually don't know all the people in the business now. I don't always know when somebody leaves or joins or what the events are. I used to know every little detail of the whole business. And now I really don't know everything that's happening. And we have a lot of specialists and people who don't even know about other products or marketing campaigns or initiatives, and there's communication problems. So I would say internally, as you add people, it really makes some of the elements of culture and communication break down and having to reconfigure. So I think internally and externally, those are a couple ways that it's different.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And again, your growth trajectory is a little bit ahead of Hunter. And again, I think, and actually I'd like to revisit, we got one question from the audience that I want to make sure we answer. And then I want to take a minute afterwards and talk about early stage people and culture. Because I think when you launch a business, you have this very passionate group of people. They're all, buying into the culture. And, as JT, as you mentioned earlier, you get to a point where there's people who launch the company and then people who can help scale it. And they're not always the same. And that was probably one of the hardest decisions I ever had to make, which is, we had to let go employee number 5 because they just weren't in a position to help scale the business. They were getting it launched. So, after we take this question, let's take a minute and then go back and talk about your guys' philosophy on culture and those early stage development of people and those things like that. So the one question we have is, what process did Hunter use to disclose some information on the invention that might have been confidential? And how did you weave that into pitch contests and through customer discovery prior to getting your patent started? And again, I think this is indicative of the entrepreneurial problem, which is I've got a great idea. It's information that needs to be closely held, but you also need to have this ability to tell people about it. So Hunter, why don't you go ahead and share, some of your thoughts on how to protect that sensitive IP, yet still manage to put it in front of people to get them excited to invest in you.
Sure. So I'll start off by giving the disclaimer here. I was very fortunate in the fact that I licensed 2 patents from the university that were already filed and issued. So it made my conversation a lot easier to speak to patents that already existed. This is a challenge that every entrepreneur is going to face, how much to disclose and when. And I will say that first off, this is not legal advice because my IP attorney would slap me for saying this. But I was somebody who certainly took the approach of oversharing to some degree. Look, when you're small, when you're a blimp on the radar, when you are a young entrepreneur and you're pitching your idea, you have to kind of show some of your cards. And I think that is advice that I would take dependent on the industry and market in which you're trying to service. So there are going to be some, times where your solution is better stuck in stealth mode. And that's kind of a newer age, startup approach to kind of not disclosing anything publicly, even the entity in which you're trying to form. I felt the opposite. I felt that I had some grounds to speak to on the IP that we had developed, and had some pending IP in the pipeline that we could speak to, generally speaking. I think it's a matter of communication. And I think that there's very specific ways in which you can promote your product and idea, and do it in a very conceptual way, do it in a very high level way, and not get into the secret sauce. And that's critical, because when you're talking to investors, when you're participating in business pitch competitions, when you're starting to talk to early adopters, they have to understand some of the details, and they have to look under the hood. You as a founder have to decide, is that NDA worthy or not for you? Are you going to ask a potential customer to sign an NDA? Well, if you don't, there's potential risk, even in filing that IP. If you do, are they even going to be there to take the conversation after you throw an NDA in front of their face? And so I really do think it's situational. I would say always be cautious, guard it in the sense that it is your IP, it is your idea, and you don't want it to just be given away. At the same time, realize that at the size and scale you are when you're starting, as a one man or a couple person show, that there's not a lot of risk in that at that point, and that there's a lot more upside potential in getting it out there and speaking to people about it. And you'd be amazed at how many people will give you feedback, including customers, on how much work you still have to go. And I think the biggest risk you truly face in this dilemma is that you don't share enough, and therefore you create something nobody wants.
JT, any words of wisdom from your side? Because again, you went through the bootstrap process, so you didn't have to necessarily, and I had a privately held business, so I had the freedom and flexibility to share whatever the hell I wanted to share, to include, information with employees and things like that. So different models, but again, similar decisions that you have to go through as to what you share, who you share it with, when you share it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I completely agree with Hunter. I feel like this is just like a thing that most entrepreneurs go through in the beginning. You think you need to trademark all your stuff right off the bat. You think someone's going to steal your idea. And honestly, ideas are a dime a dozen, and you can get really caught up thinking your idea is like the next gold mine, which it might be, but like there's already somebody out there who already has the idea or has already thought of it. I'll tell you from what I've seen, someone's going to copy, and you will be copied once you start to get noticed and you're growing. That's going to happen. It's inevitable. And it's actually an important thing to happen for your growth. So I would say that that's the point, to kind of start thinking about that and worrying. And it's going to be more about growing faster and making better decisions than your competition. I would be more concerned about IP when you're talking to suppliers, if you have a tangible good. Because when you start working with the supplier, at some point you might get to the question of who owns what. And I wish we had done a little bit of a better job, but that was after starting. So yeah, I think ideas for the most part are a dime a dozen. You shouldn't worry too much. If you go to at least I'm just more experience in Silicon Valley. If you show an NDA, you will not, like an investor will not talk to you. So.
Yeah, Bob, if you just add another comment to JT. So yes, on the investment idea, you can't show an NDA until you're, raising that couple $100 million. Unfortunately, it's just not something you really have to get into.
Yeah.
And I would just echo again, focus more at those very, very early infancy stages on getting the buy-in, not protecting the secret. There is no secret until there's buy-in, and there's something valuable there.
Yeah, and then it turns into execution, right? And
that's the bread and butter. So JT, you said greatly. There's ideas are dime a dozen. It's who actually builds the team and go and execute on the growth strategy here for actually starting to realize that opportunity, way more than it is actually having the idea. And I think that's where you start to see successful entrepreneurs separate from the pack.
Yeah. And that kind of weaves into what I wanted to talk about with, hiring and bringing on your first team. Again, I just shared a story about, employee number 5 who helped us get to a certain level, and then just kind of really tapped out in the ability to scale and grow. I invested in a company out of Los Angeles, and the CEO came to me and he said, why am I the only person that has this strategic vision? He goes, my other three partners, early employees, they're struggling kind of, innovate and come up with ideas. And I said to him, I said, look, the reality is there are as a smaller percentage of chess players than there are checkers players. And I said, you've surrounded yourself with checkers players and you don't have any strategic chess players. I said, that's just part of life. You're just going to have to realize that your core team is only going to have a few strategic people. You need to build more of those. He came back about a month later, gave me a big hug, said I saved his life because he was going crazy. But you guys have both launched companies. You convinced people to join your vision, jump on board. What's your thoughts on how you manage those early hires? Did you have any difficulties transitioning people from startup to growth to accelerated growth? Those kind of things, because it's something that I think when you're building out a team, you want to surround yourself with people that complement what you do, but at the same time have that ability to not be everything resting on your shoulders, to be the visionary, to be the strategist, to build the company. You need some help. So curious as to on the personnel side, because we've been talking a lot about finance and decision making, but at the end of the day, execution relies on people. How about you, JT? You probably got a lot more experience. You're at a point now where you don't even know all your employees. So,
well, hiring for us was very important, very important. Dehi and I, obviously, we were doing it together in the beginning, but and we interviewed all the way up until I think our 6th year every single person who came in. And it took us a little while to really figure out what we were looking for. But I would say I never had a problem selling somebody on joining. Because I'm more the visionary founder. I storytell, and I'm like the salesperson of the brand. So I feel like if I pretty much convince most people to join a mattress company at this point, but your enthusiasm is going to be what sells them, and you want that to sell them because you want people to. I would say this: one of the requirements for somebody who joins our business is somebody who wants to be there. Like, tell me why you want to join a mattress company. That's one of the questions I ask. So, I look for people who have hobbies, who are makers of some sort. Even if I would consider a maker as a musician who's like people who are growth minded and who are self-learning in their own time, because those are the people that need less help in the beginning, where you can rely on them more to make some decisions. But we worked on boiling down what those key elements were that we looked for, and how we wanted our brand to develop, how our brand would, what the brand was externally is how we wanted to hire for culturally inside. So people that have high integrity and are authentic, people who are really smart and witty, hardworking, and they're makers. That's, that covers kindness, empathy, that covers, growth, and it covers, so that's how we boiled it down, and that's how we looked for people when we would be interviewing and forming our questions around it. But we don't have much time left, so I'll stop.
We got a few more minutes, and like I said, I think unless you guys have a hard stop, we can have a few more minutes to answer that. But people always ask me, it's like, what are the two most important characteristics in an entrepreneurial environment? And again, obviously strategy, finance, execution, all that stuff is very important. But to me, it really is a team of people who are self-aware and have empathy, right? Because you're expecting these people to be in situations and understand what a small team is going through. And, again, kudos to you for drilling down into figuring out exactly what those people are you needed, and then being open and transparent about it. Hunter, how about you? What, you're not quite as, up in years as JT, but you've obviously building out a team. So what's your thoughts on the employee front?
Yes. So one of my biggest fears is that day when we start to admit to ourselves that that culture starts to dissolve. And I would say that a few things. I'll speak from the position of somebody who is going to break that 20-person employee marker this year, and who is personally interviewing every individual on the team, making sure that those first 20 employees radiate the culture that we want to be. Because I think this is the last year that I'll have the opportunity to directly interview every individual. And I think that this is a critical year to forge that culture in stone, and making sure that this is something that persists beyond our growth. So as a startup, you're attracting a certain type of person. And I do think it's important to determine whether you're in that early infancy of forming the company versus, say, growing it, because as we've already outlined today, it's a very different individual sometimes. I think for us, the reality of where we're at is that everybody on that team has to be a self-starter. It's got to be someone who does not need to be micromanaged, somebody that understands what we're trying to accomplish and understands their piece in all of this. I also think that somebody has to be extremely flexible and adaptable, because things change on a dime every day. We will set something in stone and a week later figure out we were horribly wrong, and we will pivot extremely quickly. And you have to be a certain type of person to not get really spooked out by that. You also have to be very able to wear multiple hats. I always make the joke that I am the chief trash taker outer at the office. I mean, I am just like everybody else, have to be willing to pick up anything that it comes our way, and run with it. And it requires you to take on a unique breadth of skill sets. And I think it's quite encouraging to see a lot of the folks that I work with envy that and take it on and embrace it. I also think for us personally, as an environmentally sustainable based solution and based company, I'll kind of tell a little bit of a horror story here, and obviously not mention any names or any specifics, but we sat in a team building exercise, and we all went around the room answering, what is it that brought us to this story? And there was one individual that spoke up amongst all of us and said, I really don't give a damn about the science. I could care less about the environment. I'm really just looking for a great place to work. And it caught us all extremely off guard, because everybody in that room feels some passion towards this big grand mission of leaving the world in a better place than we came into it. And that stuck out like a sore thumb in that room. And I'm happy to say that individual has not been with the team very long since that event. So I think to summarize, people are everything, especially in that early infancy. I mean, when you speak to investors, especially venture capitalists, when you're in that pre-seed, seed, Series A, even Series B realm, and you're raising, upwards of tens of millions of dollars of capital, where they're investing more than anything is team first. Number one thing they're looking for. You have a great idea. Do you have a big market? Sure, anybody can have that. Do you have the right team on board to execute upon that? And so I think not only do you have to have people that match a culture, but you have to have fill in expertise gaps. And I think a lot of founders make mistakes early on in their career where they look at themselves as being able to handle everything. I'm the first person to point out exactly what my weaknesses are. Yeah. And I will be the first to admit there are many of them. And I think that I have done a good job at filling in some of those key expertise gaps, getting the smarter people around the table that build this business with me, not for me. And it's just been exciting to watch how much we've been able to create a culture. Quite honest, is probably our number one selling point, similar to what JT was saying. I sell the vision, and people get excited and for some reason take pay cuts and riskier business ventures to come on board and build this thing with me.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, gentlemen, I think that kind of wraps up our time. First and foremost, on behalf of Penn State, Invent Penn State Startup Week, thank you guys for taking the time to join us. Incredible words of wisdom, passion. It's true to form that the Penn State community has been a big influence in where you're at today, your success, and kudos to both of you for giving back to future entrepreneurs. we're all in this club, and we wouldn't have achieved this success and got our business off the ground and without the help of other people. So it's our opportunity to give back to the next generation of entrepreneurs. So thank you very much. Congratulations on all your success. I look forward to hearing more about it. Hopefully one of these days we can all meet in person back in Happy Valley. That would be fantastic. Maybe next year at Startup Week. So again, kudos. Thank you very, very much. And we look forward to hearing more about your journeys of success. So with that, I want to thank the audience for joining us this evening for a productive and enlightening discussion. Again, a huge thank you to JT and Hunter for their generously providing their time. While this concludes the Startup Week programming for this evening, tomorrow we have over 20 more virtual events for you to enjoy. And be sure to visit startupweek.psu.edu to explore all the upcoming events, which includes a keynote with founder Matt Brzezina, who has been mentioned several times tonight, his influence on Invent Penn State, the Summer Founders Program. Fantastic individual who, again, is one of those Penn State alums, entrepreneurs, who's very passionate about making sure that we keep continuing a new generation of entrepreneurs. So join Matt with a panel discussion on alternative types of funding and a whole lot more. So with that, good night, everybody, and take care.
Thanks, Bob. Nice to see you.